Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. So we've been looking at the lives of Princess Elizabeth II and her sister, Princess Margaret. In the last episode, we saw that Prince Philip and Elizabeth got engaged, and Princess Margaret was starting to fall in love with Peter Townsend. So let us join the royal family on their South Africa trip. It should be interesting to learn more about this adventure. Princess Elizabeth gave a formal speech lasting 7 minutes and broadcast to over 200 million people. Princess Elizabeth vowed to be of service to the people, and she would be of service to the great imperial family to which everyone belonged. And when Princess Elizabeth read the first paragraph, she was moved to tears. Her family was affected the same way. Even Queen Mary wrote in her diary, "Of course I wept." And Winston Churchill did too. The speech moved Princess Margaret also. She sat with her sister at Government House, while she made the broadcast, and this was the first time she sensed how important her sister's place in history was. She was visibly shaken once the speech was delivered. On Princess Elizabeth's birthday, she got messages and presents from around the world. Her parents got her a pair of Cartier ivory leaf brooches, a diamond brooch from the royal household, the Grenadier badge in diamonds for her regiment, and Philip's gift was a jeweled family Bible. And during the royal tour, students, civil dignitaries, and others stood in traffic or on street corners raising money for a check to present to the princess on her birthday. Johannesburg donations amounted to 140,000 pounds. In Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, more than 42,000 school children had contributed their weekly pocket money, whether they wanted to or not, toward a platinum brooch set with 300,000 diamonds, and it was presented to the princess. They also got fruits and sweets and stockings, and on the farewell lunch, the Union of South Africa presented the king with 399 specially cut diamonds, which was to be used to create his garter star, and the queen got a solid gold tea service set, plus a large 8.55-carat marquise diamonds. Margaret and Elizabeth were presented with the perfect 6.5-carat blue-white diamonds by De Beers. The book Elizabeth and Margaret said that during this trip you would think that Margaret would feel a distance from Elizabeth because she was getting all the attention, but they grew closer on this trip. Margaret this time was steady and optimistic, and Princess Elizabeth was gloomy and doubtful. Elizabeth was missing Philip, and Margaret was her ray of sunshine, and she offered support and encouragement. The secretary for the royal family gave Princess Elizabeth his highest praise. He said, "She's got all Princess Margaret's solid and endearing qualities, plus an astonishing solitude for other people's comfort. Such unselfishness is not a normal characteristic of that family." So the royal family returned in 1947, and they had missed one of the most catastrophic winters in memory. The royal family had gone to South Africa mainly to help George VI regain his strength, but he had lost 17 pounds. And then once they were home, the queen called for the best medical care. Well, of course, Princess Elizabeth glowed when she got back home and got to see Prince Philip again. And there was a ball held in the Red Drawing Room at Windsor Castle, and they danced almost every dance together. With Philip by her side, she appeared more delicate but less shy. Before Prince Philip married, a friend of his joked, "You've chosen the wrong girl. Margaret is much better looking." And Philip said, "You wouldn't say that if you knew them. Elizabeth," he said, "was sweet and kind like her mother." Before the wedding, St. James' Place held all the wedding gifts. There were 2,583 gifts. Queen Mary gifted an entire chest of jewels, along with a Georgian silver, an antique Chinese screen, several mahogany tables, linen, and table lamps. The king and queen gave Elizabeth an assortment of necklaces and earrings, studded with glimmering sapphires, diamonds, and rubies. And Margaret gave them a dozen engraved champagne glasses and a picnic case, and privately she gave Elizabeth a silver inkstand. Margaret was content and grounded during this time. She was happy that Elizabeth was happy, and Elizabeth, on the night before her wedding, spent the night in her nursery room right near her little sister. The wedding, over 200 million tuned into the radio broadcast. Thousands more lined the streets outside of Westminster Abbey. The year of 1947 was a bad one for England, and a small group of Labour members of Parliament sent a letter to the chief whip complaining about the cost of the wedding. The finance minister, Dalton, he wasn't a fan of the monarchy, but he took up for him and said that The monies from the king's civil list funds had paid for the entire cost of her wedding, apart from decorated outside the palace and along Whitehall, so this was the only bill the taxpayer had picked up. Getting ready was easy for Prince Philip. He wore his workday Navy lieutenant's uniform. The bride and her 8 bridesmaids were being fussed over, and it took them 2 hours to fit the princess into her Botticelli-inspired ivory satin gown, and it had taken 350 dressmakers 7 weeks to construct the gown. There were a few things that went wrong before the wedding. The bouquet went missing, and then her favorite rope of pearls went missing too. After that, the sunray tiara broke, and repairs were made. The pearls in the bouquet were found, so everything was fine at the end. So Margaret was behind the bride and 3 steps ahead of the other bridesmaids. She stopped 3 times along the procession to straighten the older sister's extensive train. And when they had the wedding breakfast, Philip made a short speech, and then Princess Elizabeth said that Philip and I should be as happy as my mother and father had been. Prince Philip wrote his mother-in-law a letter, and he wanted to reassure Queen Elizabeth that he would diligently care for her daughter. Lilibet is the only thing in the world which is absolutely real to me, and my only ambition is to weld the 2 of us into a new combined existence that will not only be able to withstand the shocks directed at us, but will also have a positive existence for the good. After the wedding breakfast, Margaret urged everyone together for photos, shouting, "Come along, everybody." She was really happy that day. And when it was over, Margaret spoke emotionally to Crofty about her sense of loss. She told the governess, "I can't imagine life here without her." And Crofty told her, "Never mind, you will be next." Princess Elizabeth felt like the first week of the honeymoon was vulgar and disgraceful. The media was mobbing them, and curious crowds wanted to catch a glimpse of them. Then they escaped to Birk Hall in Scotland. Queen Elizabeth had to play nursemaid when Prince Philip got a bad cold, and she wrote her family a letter, and she said she was blissfully happy. The king responded, "I felt I had lost something very precious. Our family, us 4, the royal family, must remain together, with the addition, of course, at the suitable moments." At the end of the letter, he said, "Your leaving us has left a great blank in our lives, but do remember that our old home is still yours, and do come back to it as much and as often as possible." And when they returned to London after the honeymoon, they were in time for the king's birthday. They didn't have a home yet, so they moved back into Elizabeth's old rooms while their house at Clarence House went to extensive renovations in order to be lived in. Now the royal family was 5 instead of 4. Prince Philip was young and healthy, and the king by this time had failing health. Elizabeth was always accepting of her father's will and started to act as his nurse. The Queen and Princess Margaret grew closer as they shared an interest in art, music, and the theater. Margaret started to visit her sister and brother-in-law while they were at the Windlesham Moor, a weekend retreat. Margaret didn't care for Philip's terse orders and brisk language. One time Philip forbade the staff from serving her breakfast in bed, which was her usual weekend habit. The sisters, though, were closer than ever, and when Elizabeth became pregnant, Margaret showed concern, and she had no envy. The king was having problems with his legs at this time. He went to Townsend and said, "What's the matter with my blasted legs? They won't work properly." He had constant pain and it hurt at times, and he kept it a secret, only telling Townsend. The following September, Townsend accompanied Princess Margaret to Amsterdam. She was representing the king at the inauguration of Queen Juliana of the Netherlands. It was on this trip that the others began to take notice of Princess Margaret and Peter Townsend making eyes at each other. Townsend later remarked, without realizing it, "I was being carried a little further from home, a little nearer to the princess." He started to think of her not only as a subject, but as an attractive and seductive woman. Townsend realized he was trapped in a marriage that was falling apart. And when his wife had an affair with a guards officer, that was the end of the marriage. When Princess Margaret returned home, she found out her father wasn't doing well, and he told the doctors that he'd been having a bad leg pain. He had secretly been treating himself, and his doctors were shocked by his serious condition. The doctors told him that he had an inflammation of the blood vessels. He also had gangrene and cirrhosis of the liver and a lung ailment that could be cancer. The king didn't want his daughter Elizabeth to find out that because she was due to have her baby at any time. 2 days after the king's diagnosis, Elizabeth had Prince Philip. and the celebrating took place outside Buckingham Palace. And when Margaret found out, she said, "I suppose I'll now be known as Charlie's aunt." November the 16th, the king realized his long-anticipated tour of Australia and New Zealand had to be postponed. Margaret was shocked and disappointed about her father's illness. She had been excited about the thoughts of going with her parents to New Zealand and Australia. But the king got well enough to go to Prince Charles's baptism. Margaret was his godparent, and she held the baby in the Honiton lace that she had worn, and so had Princess Elizabeth. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret started to do more formal duties for King George VI. The king, having to be inside, made him more irritable than he was before, and Princess Margaret was the only one who could calm him down. Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip would take time out to enjoy themselves, and they would go out to dinner and dancing in London clubs. While Princess Elizabeth didn't want to read about herself in articles, Princess Margaret was always seeing what people were saying about her. When she was 19, she was the first female royal to be seen smoking in public, and she had a long ivory cigarette holder. And when Queen Mary objected, Margaret got back at her by making her cigarette holder even longer. And when Duff Cooper and his wife, Lady Diana Cooper, went to lunch with the royal family at Buckingham Palace, he was impressed by all four, especially by Margaret. He said she was very sure of herself and full of humor, and he said in his diary, she might get into trouble before she's finished. People were impressed by her wardrobe, but conservative critics attacked her lack of modesty and felt that she showed too much of her figure, and sometimes her mother would get on her about it too. Before Crofty left, she complained about Margaret and her irresponsibility, and the Queen said, "We're only young once. Crofty, we want her to have a good time. With Lilibet gone, it is lonely for her here." And at this time, Margaret had a friend and her lady-in-waiting named Charmin. She turned into a surrogate sister. When Margaret turned 18, there was about 31 eligible young bachelors hanging around, and Peter Townsend was there in the background. He would go with her and the lady-in-waiting on official engagements, and when they were in public, he called her ma'am, and in private, he called her Margaret. Princess Elizabeth in November 1949 flew to Malta to join her husband. He was on the destroyer HMS Checkers. She was there for 6 weeks, and they were on an island. It was like a second honeymoon. And she stayed at Uncle Dickie's house, and she was accompanied by her lady-in-waiting, Bobo, and a detective. And she led a normal life, even with thousands who lined up in the streets to greet her when she got there. She would visit hospitals, factories, and libraries. She went shopping, sightseeing, and explored the bays, the coves, and inlets on a cruiser named the Eden, and she did that with Philip. In the afternoons, she hosted tea parties for the officers' wives, attended dinners, and went dancing on the ship HMS Checkers at the officers' mess shindig. So this felt like freedom for Princess Elizabeth. This was the first time she handled money to pay to get her hair done, and Elizabeth went back to Sandringham after her and Prince Philip had spent the holidays together. And she got back to her duties. The king was happy to have her back, and anyone who saw them together could see how close they were. On August the 15th, Princess Elizabeth gave birth to Princess Anne, and Prince Philip at this time was given command of the ship, the frigate HMS Magpie, in September. He was only 29, and he was doing well in his naval career. So I'm going to end the video here. I've been a fan of the royal family ever since I was a young teenager. I didn't know much about the English history. When I got into college, I took English history, and I loved learning about it. I felt I needed to know more about the royal family, so I came up with the idea of creating this channel. I would discover all about the royal family and share what I found out with the viewers. And I wasn't sure that it was something that people would be interested in, and when I asked my sister about it, she said I should do it. So I'm glad she encouraged me on that. And I found out so much more about the royal family that I never knew before. So, and I also think there will be much more to find out, so don't worry about me running out of material anytime soon. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. If anyone has a suggestion for what you would like to see, just let me know and I'll see what I can do. I wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.